Imagine, if you will, a small industrious town nestled in the valley, where the smoke of factories rises thick into the air, mixing with the sounds of hammers striking steel. It's the late 19th century in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, an era of booming industry and sharp contrasts. Above this town, perched high on a hill, sits an imposing dam. To you and your neighbors, it's just part of the landscape looming silently above. Its true power unknown, its dangers only whispered about in the hushed corners of local taverns. You work in the Cambria ironworks, surrounded by the deafening noise of clanging metal, the unbearable heat of molten steel, and the ever-present cloud of smoke. It's a hard, grim life, but it's all you know. The Industrial Revolution has made some men very rich, but for you, life is a constant struggle against exhaustion and the ever-present dangers of working in a steel mill. In the quiet moments, as the sun sets and the town settles into the shadow of the looming dam, you occasionally hear whispers of strange things about the dam. The workers and the townsfolk talk of its groaning under heavy rains, its poor construction, the shoddy materials used. But those are just rumors, right? After all, who has time to worry about that when there is work to be done? You live your life in a constant rhythm of work, rest, and routine, unaware that above you a catastrophe is silently brewing, a disaster that will forever change the course of your life and the fate of your town. A disaster that is being quietly set in motion by a group of men, wealthy industrialists, removed from the harsh realities of your world, who have no understanding of the damage their actions will cause. Their negligence, driven by luxury and privilege, will eventually come crashing down on your life in a flood of death and destruction. In this first segment, we journey into the heart of Johnstown, a town shaped by the rise of industry and the looming presence of the South Fork Dam, a structure that would prove to be the instrument of a devastating tragedy. You wake early, as you always do. The streets of Johnstown are still shrouded in the quiet haze of dawn, the air thick with the scent of coal and the promise of another long day ahead. The iron mills, the lifeblood of the town, are already alive with the hum of industry. You've worked at the Cambria ironworks for as long as you can remember, the clang of metal, and the roar of the furnace, now familiar sounds that follow you throughout the day. Your hands are calloused from years of hard work, your lungs forever burdened by the dust of steel. The town itself is a constant reminder of the machine-like existence you lead. The smoke that curls from the mills blends into the grey sky above, and the ground beneath your feet is always thick with soot and grime. It's a hard life, but it's a life that supports you, your family, and countless others like you. Every morning you pass the row houses that stretch across the town, families living in close quarters, bound together by the shared experience of factory work. You know the rhythm of life here well. Wake, work, rest, repeat. But as you go about your routine, you are also surrounded by a curious feature of the landscape, the South Fork Dam. Sitting high above the town, you can just make out its silhouette from the street corners, a dark line against the horizon. It's an imposing structure even from a distance, but it doesn't dominate your thoughts. It belongs to the rich men from Pittsburgh, the industrial magnates who own much of the town's wealth and infrastructure. They're not the type to bother with the likes of you. The dam holds a massive lake that you and your neighbors are forbidden to visit. It's a private water source, kept off limits, reserved for the elite few who hold membership to the exclusive South Fork Fishing and Hunting Club. For most, the dam is a distant thing, existing in a world of privilege far removed from the daily grind of millwork. But every now and then you hear the rumors. The dam groans during heavy rains, you're told. The earth around it has shifted, making the structure weak in places. The whispers of the workers who maintain it only add to the unease. The dam is old, built quickly and cheaply, they say. No one really knows what's behind the locked gates that separate you from the lake, but you feel a tension in the air, a sense that something isn't quite right. You dismiss these concerns, though. You have work to do, and the worries of others are just that, others' worries. Still, every time the rains come and the storms roll through the valley, there's a subtle unease that creeps into your thoughts. The ground shakes, the winds howl, and sometimes you can almost hear the distant sound of a groan from the dam above. But life is too hard, too relentless to dwell on such things. You push the thought away, focusing on the work at hand. Little do you know, every day that passes brings you and your town closer to an unimaginable disaster. a disaster created not by the elements, but by the carelessness of men who lived in a world where their actions had no consequences for the likes of you. And then the rains come, in torrents. The sky opens up and the storm rages for days. You can hear the thunder as it rattles the windows of your home and feel the steady thrum of the storm against the earth. For hours, the rain beats down, flooding the streets and swelling the rivers. The air grows thick with the smell of wet earth and rotting wood. The town, already filled with smoke and soot, now feels even more suffocating as the water begins to rise. Still, there's no real concern. It's just another storm, you think. The dam has held before, hasn't it? But the dam is not what it seems. It is not a monument to strength and stability, but a fragile structure built with shoddy materials and maintained with little care. The storm that has been brewing for days is the one that will reveal the true cost of carelessness. You are about to learn just how little control you have over the forces around you, and how quickly the world you know can come crashing down. As we move away from the industrial streets of Johnstown, let us ascend to the world that exists high above the town, where the air is cleaner, the view broader, and the concerns of daily life seem distant, if not entirely irrelevant. Up on the hill, overlooking the town below, sits the South Fork Fishing and Hunting Club, an exclusive retreat for America's wealthiest and most powerful men. Among its members were the titans of industry, men like Andrew Carnegie and Henry Frick, names that were synonymous with the growth of American industry, wealth, and power. Carnegie and Frick, along with their peers, were at the height of their influence. Carnegie's steel empire had reshaped America's industrial landscape, and Frick had played a pivotal role in the growth of the steel industry. These men, who had built fortunes out of iron and coal, were now seeking solace and leisure in the private, manicured world of the South Fork Club. Here, they could escape the stresses of business and enjoy their wealth, indulging in hunting, fishing, and extravagant weekend parties. At the heart of this exclusive retreat stood the South Fork Dam, a massive earthen structure designed to hold back the waters of the lake that the club used for recreational purposes. This dam was not built for the benefit of the town below, but for the leisure of the club's wealthy members. The lake, with its serene beauty and idyllic surroundings, became a symbol of privilege, a playground for the industrial elite. But, as we will soon see, this symbol of privilege was also a ticking time bomb, one that would eventually bring devastation to the town below. The dam, originally built as part of a larger project in the mid-1800s, had been sold to the South Fork Club in 1879. When the club took ownership, it was not with a deep understanding of the dam's structural integrity. The wealthy men who frequented the club were more concerned with the aesthetics and leisure of their retreat than with the safety of the dam itself. Instead of investing in repairs and proper maintenance, the members of the South Fork Club made several disastrous modifications to the structure. They installed fish screens at the base of the dam to prevent fish from escaping the lake, a seemingly harmless decision that would later prove catastrophic. These screens blocked the dam's spillway, the very mechanism that was supposed to release excess water during heavy rains. Without a proper way to release water, the lake had no way to handle the tremendous pressure that accumulated during storms, and the dam, already weakened by years of neglect, was left vulnerable. As the club's wealthiest members enjoyed their weekends of fishing and leisurely pursuits, they were oblivious to the danger that had been set in motion. The engineers who worked on the dam had warned them of the risks, warnings that were ignored. The men of the club had built their empires on the backs of others, and it seemed that this disregard for the well-being of the workers and townsfolk below extended to their treatment of the environment around them. The dam, once an impressive structure, had been reduced to a mere backdrop for their leisure, a tool for their enjoyment rather than a responsibility to be taken seriously. The South Fork Club members were not the only ones responsible for the dam's tragic failure. The local government and engineers who had originally built the dam had also cut corners, using subpar materials and hasty construction methods. Over the years, the dam had settled and shifted, its structural integrity compromised. Yet as the years passed, no one bothered to check or reinforce the dam. The idea of a failure seemed too improbable to consider. Why would such a massive structure, built to withstand the forces of nature, ever fail? It was this very arrogance, this sense of invulnerability, that would eventually lead to disaster. But the men who frequented the South Fork Fishing and Hunting Club continued to hold their exclusive gatherings, blissfully unaware of the threat looming just above. The dam groaned under the weight of years of neglect, and the heavy rains of May 1889 proved to be the breaking point. What followed was a tragedy that could have been prevented had these men been willing to invest the resources into maintaining the dam, had they been more concerned with the safety of those below them rather than with their own comfort. On the night of May 31st, 1889, after days of heavy rainfall, the South Fork Dam finally gave way. The waters, held back for so long, surged over the dam's crumbling edges and cascaded down the valley. In just a matter of minutes, the floodwaters would become a raging torrent, wiping out everything in their path. The flood struck Johnstown without warning, devastating the town and claiming the lives of over 2,200 people, many of them workers like you, living in the shadow of the dam. The consequences of the dam's failure were catastrophic, but they were also deeply tied to the carelessness and disregard shown by those who had the power to prevent it. The wealthy members of the South Fork Club, who had once enjoyed their weekends of luxury and leisure, now found themselves at the center of a national scandal. Their negligence had led to one of the deadliest disasters in American history, and their wealth and power could not shield them from the outrage that followed. As you imagine the day of the flood, think of the sheer force of the water that tore through the streets, the destruction of homes, and the helplessness of the town's residents as the waters rose higher and higher. The rich men who had caused this disaster would never truly understand the pain and suffering of those below. They had created a paradise for themselves, a place of luxury and ease, but they had failed to realize that the cost of their indulgence was the lives of others. Now that we've explored the disastrous consequences of the South Fork Dam's collapse, let us take a step back and carefully analyze what caused this catastrophic event. It's a story of human error, poor planning, and most of all, negligence. Today, with the tools of modern forensics and engineering, we can trace exactly what went wrong. The failure of the South Fork Dam wasn't a singular event. It was the result of years of weak decisions and substandard construction that, combined with an unexpected deluge, finally led to one of the deadliest disasters in American history. Let us start with the dam itself, a structure that, when built in the mid-1800s, was intended to hold back a massive reservoir of water, feeding the reservoir of the South Fork Fishing and Hunting Club. The dam was designed to be large and sturdy, but from the outset there were compromises made in its construction. It was not built to withstand the forces of nature in the way it needed to, and as time passed, it became increasingly clear that the dam was a ticking time bomb. The South Fork Dam was an earthen structure, made primarily of compacted soil and rock. Its design relied on the stability of the materials used to build it, but from the very beginning it was a poorly constructed dam. The dam's embankment was too steep, and its spillway, one of the most critical components designed to allow excess water to flow safely over the dam during heavy rains, was far too small and poorly maintained. The engineers who oversaw its construction were not experts in dam safety. They simply didn't account for the magnitude of the disaster that could happen if the dam failed. Perhaps the most glaring flaw in the dam's design was the lack of a proper discharge system. A discharge system is designed to manage excess water by allowing it to safely pass through or over the dam during times of intense rainfall. This system, if properly implemented, could have alleviated the pressure building up behind the dam. Unfortunately, when the South Fork Club took over the dam in 1879, they made some fateful decisions that would directly contribute to the failure. The first of these was the installation of fish screens on the dam. These screens were intended to keep fish from escaping the reservoir and disrupting the local fishing experience for the wealthy club members. While this may seem like a harmless addition, these screens were a serious problem. They blocked the spillway, preventing the free flow of water. As a result, when rainwater began to collect behind the dam, there was nowhere for it to go except for the increasingly fragile dam structure itself. This simple modification turned out to be a fatal mistake. Moreover, the dam's embankment, which had been made from dirt and rock, was never properly maintained. Over time, erosion caused the embankment to become more unstable. The lack of proper upkeep of the dam, combined with the weight of the water it held back, created an environment where even a small crack could eventually lead to a catastrophic failure. As the weeks leading up to the disaster passed, the weather played its part. The region had been experiencing heavy rainfall for several days before the breach. The already overtaxed dam was now facing more water than it could handle. The water level in the reservoir continued to rise, and with no proper spillway or discharge system to relieve the pressure, the dam began to show signs of stress. Residents of the nearby town of Johnstown, especially those who worked in the steel mills and had a better view of the dam, began to hear rumors of groaning sounds from the structure. The dam was under immense pressure, but the people living in the valley, unaware of how close they were to disaster, went about their lives unprepared for the calamity that was about to unfold. On the evening of May 31st, 1889, after days of relentless rainfall, the dam finally gave way. The force of the water behind the dam was simply too great to be contained by the weak and poorly maintained structure. In a split second, the South Fork Dam collapsed, releasing over 20 million tons of water into the valley below. The floodwaters, racing down the valley at an incredible speed, tore through Johnstown and the surrounding areas. Homes were swept away, bridges collapsed, and entire neighborhoods were submerged in the raging torrent. The flood, which came without warning, was a terrifying and chaotic event. The destruction was overwhelming, and the loss of life was unimaginable. Over 2,200 people, many of them working-class residents of Johnstown, perished in the flood. The river that had once been a peaceful, meandering waterway had become a violent force of nature, unstoppable in its fury. Modern forensics and archaeological research have helped us piece together the exact sequence of events that led to the disaster. By examining historical accounts, engineering blueprints, and even the remnants of the dam's ruins, we can trace the weaknesses in the dam S structure and understand how small errors snowballed into a disaster of such magnitude. It wasn't just the physical collapse of the dam that caused the flood. It was the years of neglect, the failure to heed warnings, and the disregard for the safety of the people living below. In the aftermath, investigators concluded that the South Fork Dam's failure was not just a natural disaster, but the result of human failure. The rich men who owned the dam, like the industrial magnates of the time, had no real concern for the lives of the working-class residents below. Their luxury retreat had been built on corners cut and decisions made in the name of cost-saving, and those decisions ultimately cost over 2,200 people their lives. The Johnstown Flood was a tragedy, caused not by the forces of nature alone, but by human error, negligence, and greed. It serves as a reminder of how the pursuit of luxury and leisure can blind even the wealthiest and most powerful individuals to the consequences of their actions. The dam's failure was not just the failure of an engineering structure, it was the failure of responsibility, accountability, and empathy for those who lived beneath it. Now, as we step away from the chaos and destruction of the floodwaters, let us take a moment to imagine a world far removed from the hardships of the steelworkers in Johnstown. Above the town, perched high on the hill, the South Fork Fishing and Hunting Club offered a stark contrast to the grim realities faced by those below. It was a world of wealth, privilege, and leisurely pursuits, a world that few could ever imagine entering, let alone experience. Here, in the private retreats of America's wealthiest industrialists, the beauty of nature was enjoyed with the comfort of luxury and the ease of privilege. The members of the South Fork Fishing and Hunting Club were the titans of the American Industrial Revolution, men like Andrew Carnegie, Henry Frick, and other wealthy steel magnates and financiers. These men, whose names were synonymous with power and progress, had created empires out of iron and steel, building fortunes that allowed them to escape the grinding realities of the world below. The club itself was a sanctuary for these men, an idyllic retreat where they could escape the hustle of their business dealings, surrounded by nature and the company of fellow aristocrats. At the heart of the club's allure was its artificial lake, a tranquil body of water created by the South Fork Dam, which was intended solely for the enjoyment of the club's members. The lake became the centerpiece of this exclusive retreat, a place where the men of the club could indulge in boating, fishing, and other leisurely activities. The surrounding grounds were dotted with lavish cottages, which, in truth, were more like grand mansions than the humble cabins one might expect. These cottages were filled with fine furnishings, elegant decor, and all the comforts that the industrial elite had come to expect. The walls were adorned with expensive paintings, the floors covered in rich carpets, and the dining rooms furnished with luxurious tables and chairs where extravagant meals were served. The members of the club spent their weekends in a haze of luxury, hunting in the wooded areas around the lake, enjoying fine dining and sophisticated conversation, and taking leisurely boat rides across the serene waters. The idyllic setting was the perfect escape from the hustle and bustle of their industrial empires, a place where they could relax and unwind, surrounded by their wealth and their peers. The club was not just a retreat, it was a symbol of their status, a place where they could show off their wealth and indulge in the pleasures that their hard-earned fortunes had afforded them. The lifestyle of the club's members was defined by excess and leisure. They would gather for grand dinners, where the finest wines and food were served in abundance. The air would be filled with the sounds of laughter and conversation, as the men discussed business, politics, and the latest developments in the world of industry. They were free from the concerns that weighed on the workers in the town below. In their world, the problems of the everyday man were distant and irrelevant. The dam, which they viewed as a simple tool for their pleasure, was an afterthought, something they assumed would function without issue, serving their recreational needs without question. The disparity between the lives of the Club's members and those of the working-class people in Johnstown could not have been more pronounced. While the industrial magnates lived in luxury, their workers lived in squalor. The steelworkers in Johnstown toiled in the factories, enduring the constant dangers of their work, while the club members spent their weekends in the comfort of their lavish cottages, far removed from the harsh realities of the town below. This stark contrast is perhaps the most jarring aspect of the South Fork Fishing and Hunting Club. It was a sanctuary for those who had everything, while the people who lived in the valley beneath it had little to nothing at all. And yet the very thing that separated the two worlds, the South Fork Dam, was built with the same indifference to the lives of the working-class people below. The negligence that led to the dam's failure was rooted in the same sense of entitlement that characterized the members of the club. They believed that their wealth and status insulated them from the consequences of their actions. The dam, a symbol of their privilege and luxury, was designed and maintained with a lack of care that would ultimately lead to the disaster that would devastate Johnstown. It is chilling to think of the complacency with which the club's members treated the dam. For them, it was simply an object to serve their pleasure, a part of their weekend retreat, an amusement to be enjoyed without any thought to the broader consequences. They lived in a world of comforts, surrounded by beauty, with no comprehension of the suffering and hardship experienced by the people below. And yet, when the dam failed and the floodwaters surged down the valley, the very structure that had been built to serve their luxury became the instrument of destruction for the town they had so callously overlooked. The contrast between the leisurely days spent at the club and the devastating flood that followed is both profound and tragic. While the wealthy elite enjoyed the comforts of their luxury retreat, the people of Johnstown were living in constant fear, struggling to survive in the shadows of their negligence. The flood that followed the dam's collapse swept through the town, washing away homes, businesses, and families in an instant. The carefree atmosphere of the South Fork Club was shattered, and the devastating consequences of the club's negligence would forever stain the legacy of its members. As we conclude this journey through the Gilded Age, we are reminded of the stark contrasts that defined this era, between the opulence of the industrial elite and the struggles of the working class. The story of the South Fork Fishing and Hunting Club and the Johnstown Flood is a cautionary tale of privilege, negligence, and the consequences of careless luxury. It is a reminder of how easily the lives of the powerful can be separated from the realities of those they affect, and how a single decision made in the comfort of wealth can lead to catastrophe for those living below. As you reflect on this story, think of the vast difference in worlds: the serene lake, the grand cottages, the fine dining of the wealthy, juxtaposed against the dark, grim reality of Johnstown, where the sounds of industry and the suffocating heat of the steel mills filled the air. It's a contrast that's hard to ignore, and yet it's a truth that remains all too common throughout history, where the carelessness of the few can have devastating effects on the many. And as you close your eyes now, imagine the soft rustle of the trees in the breeze, the quiet hum of the town, and the faint sound of the rushing water where once a disaster unfolded, reminding us that no matter how high we rise, the forces of nature and human error are always just a step away from undoing it all. Good night.